Alhamdulillah, it's a great blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have such a great audience tonight regarding a subject which unfortunately does not receive the attention that it deserves. MashaAllah, we see programs such as a night on the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see a night of the Quran. We see a night on the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. All of these are noble endeavors, noble efforts that we should try our best to facilitate, alhamdulillah. However, one subject that often goes overlooked is the subject of hadith. I want to pose a quick question to everybody here right now. I want to hear, in your opinion, what is the greatest invention, accomplishment of the Muslim civilization? Anybody want to take a shot at this? What is the greatest invention or accomplishment by the Muslim civilization?
Compilation of Hadith.
Compilation of Hadith, mashallah, that's one. Anything else? Anybody else? We hear math, science. They say the first person to invent coffee, that's why we have Dunkin' Donuts, was somebody named Khalid who was a shepherd. Yes. Algebra, mashallah. Anything else? Chemistry, mashallah. So we are well aware of a number of different sciences which have had direct contribution from the Muslim civilization. And mashallah, like the Shaykh mentioned, one of the contributions which generally is not noticed is the science of hadith. We often take it for granted that we say the Prophet ﷺ said something. Can one of the youngsters over here just mention any hadith that comes to his mind? Anybody? The brother who's chewing gum, inshallah. Sorry to put you in the spotlight. You actually are in the spotlight anyways. Yes. Any hadith that you know?
Actions are based on intention.
MashaAllah. Beautiful hadith. The first hadith that comes in Sahih al-Bukhari. Another hadith, yes. MashaAllah. With the Arabic. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. MashaAllah. That's beautiful. When we say the Prophet ﷺ said إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, the question comes, he lived over 1400 years ago. What evidence do you have that he said it? I can tell you, thinkers like Plato, they said something, right? What evidence do I have to support that that person actually said it? What evidence do I have? In Islam, one of the greatest accomplishments, what is it? Is that when we say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, we are able to verify the person whom I heard it from, who he heard it from, who he heard it from, all the way back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is an accomplishment nobody in history besides the Muslims were able to accomplish. For that we should say alhamdulillah. That we can say with such courage and confidence that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said something and we can back it up with evidence. Tonight's topic that was given, entitled A Night of Hadeeth, mashallah, Sheikh Abdul Basir, who is much more qualified than me, is also here. I feel so honored to be sharing a seat with him. Just as an introduction, I'll try my best to cover some of the theoretical aspects. And I'd like to give a disclaimer at the opening of this talk that it may be slightly complex, it may be slightly intricate, but I implore everybody to just stick with me, stay with me, inshallah. If you are getting tired or bored, you can raise your hand and tell me to crack a joke, and inshallah I'll try to crack a joke. Is that a fine deal? You guys will listen to me. If you guys get bored, I'll crack a joke, and inshallah you guys will start laughing, unless you heard my jokes already. So inshallah, tonight's subject is the Dynamics of Hadeeth, an introduction into essential discussions of Hadith. So I just want to briefly outline what subjects we will cover tonight. I want to talk about four main things. Number one, the sources of law. Number two, definition of hadith. Number three, the preservation of hadith. Number four, guidelines on dealing with descriptive and legalistic hadith. If some of the brothers or sisters have difficulty in understanding some of the technical jargon, just raise your hand and inshallah, I would be delighted to clarify some concepts if they are too difficult to understand. So inshallah, we want to talk about the theoretical aspects of hadith. We can sit down and read certain ahadith. We can open up Sahih al-Bukhari, mashallah. We'll read إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. We'll read so many ahadith. And the Prophet ﷺ In a mutawatir hadith, he says, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَوَعَاهَا فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will illuminate the face of that person who hears my hadith and he conveys it to others. So although we may not hear hadith per se, we will be listening to discussions related to hadith, and inshallah we ask Allah to bring us among those people whose faces will also be illuminated. Say Ameen inshallah, Ameen. So we will discuss 4 subjects inshallah. The first subject we want to talk about is the sources of law. When we talk about a particular practice, we all perform Salatul Maghrib, yes? We all perform Salatul Maghrib. How many rak'at did we pray? 3 rak'at, right? Did we pray 5? Did we pray 7 fard? No, we didn't. We prayed 3 rak'at. The question comes, how do we come to know that the amount of rak'at that I have to pray is 3? It's not 4 or 5, or it's not 7. We have to look at the evidences provided in our beloved Sharia. And there are 4 sources that a jurist can go and tap into, from which he can deduce certain laws. What are the 4 sources? Number 1, the Quran. That I want to know what my Allah wants from me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba. Oh, you who believe, do not engage in interest. Allah is addressing me. So I go into the Quran and I will get my evidence. That's the first source of law. What's the second source of law? The Sunnah and the Hadith. We go into the life of the Prophet ﷺ, who expounds upon the Quran. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was once asked, can you describe the Prophet ﷺ to us? Can you describe the Prophet ﷺ to us? How do you think she described the Prophet ﷺ? He was a courageous man. He was a generous man. He was an intelligent man. All of those qualities were definitely found in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. But Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said so beautifully that you want to know his character, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. That you look into the Prophet ﷺ, you see a perfect reflection of the Quran. And that is why the life of the Prophet ﷺ was a commentary to the Quran. When we want to understand the Quran, our first point of reference is the Prophet ﷺ. So when we look into the sources of law, that I want to know what my Sharia wants from me, then first is the Quran. After the Quran, I go to supplementary sources. And what is that? That is the Hadith, which in reality is also a primary source. A third source, Ijma', consensus. There are a number of issues that you will not find in the Quran or in the Sunnah. But you will find that the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, they have ijma', they have agreed upon it. I'll give you one example. Takbiratul Tashriq. We do Takbiratul Tashriq during Eid al-Adha. This you won't find explicitly mentioned from the Prophet ﷺ or in the Quran. After the salawat you do your takbirat. You won't find that. Where will you find it? In the hadith. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali in Sharh al-Tirmidhi and his Fath al-Bari, he mentions that you won't find any particular evidence for this, but you'll find all of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum practicing upon this. What does that show? That if I also want to know what the Sharia wants from me, I have to look what the Muslim Ummah, the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, the Tabi'ut Tabi'in, the Imam Mujtahideen, what did they practice upon? I look into their lives and I'll also find evidence. Number 4. Where else can I look? I can look into what you call a source analogy. You'll have something mentioned in the Quran, you'll have something mentioned in the Sunnah, but you don't find anything particular for our example. I'm driving a car. Now I go into the hadith and I say, look, I don't find anything about a car. So am I allowed to drive it? No, it's haram. I have to ride a camel to masjid. MashaAllah, JMC, I have to come in a camel and I have to park my camel outside because there's no car mentioned in the hadith or in the Quran. No, you have something known as analogy. Something is mentioned in the Quran, a conveyance, a camel, etc. And I will analogize. I will look for a similitude and I'll practice upon that. So in summary, you have 4 sources of law. When I want to know what my Sharia wants from me, I first look into the Quran. Allah says, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. Do not come into salah when you are drunk. Now that is something I get from the Quran. I want to know how many raka'at I pray. I look into the sunnah. I want to know particular practices that I do during Eid al-Adha, for instance. I look into the ijma' and the practice of the Sahaba. I have certain actions that I know are prohibited, but I can't find an example explicitly. I will look into the lives of the Sahaba, to the Quran and the Hadith, and I'll look for an example. So my focus here is not the Quran consensus or analogy. Tonight is a night of Hadith, so we want to know more about the Hadith. So that's the next part, inshallah. We're going to talk about what is a Hadith. You can congratulate me on my graphic design, inshallah, later on. What is a Hadith? When we talk about a Hadith, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, mashallah, the student said so beautifully, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. And our brother, mashallah, chewing gum, I don't know your name, but mashallah, he also said the Hadith that practices are based upon intention. That shows that this is a Hadith. But that's not exactly what a Hadith is. The word Hadith in Arabic, does anybody know what it means? The word Hadith, what does it mean linguistically? Yes? Speech, mashallah. Anything else?
Is it narration?
Narration, that's a possibility. One of the meanings of Hadith in Arabic is something which is an accident. Something which comes into existence. The Quran never came into existence, it was always existing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Hadith are the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the most beautiful explanation of what a Hadith is, yes, go ahead.
Everything is predetermined, nothing can be an accident.
Inshallah, we can go into the technicalities of that later on, but we're talking about from a linguistic definition and in terms of what is apparent to us, inshallah. We can talk about taqdeer and predestination, inshallah, later on, but very good observation. So, when we talk about what a hadith is, linguistically, again, it refers to an accident. What do you mean by an accident? Something that comes into existence spontaneously. By the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything is known. But what is in front of us, that is what we have to practice upon. Nonetheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Duha, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And that is what Allah is saying to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the blessing of your Lord, go and tell mankind. Allama Shabir Ahmad Uthmani says that this is where the word hadith is best derived from. That the word hadith, you find it in the Quran, it is derived from there. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Allah is telling Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, your bounties, go and tell the entire mankind. So that is what hadith are in essence. They are the bounties upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But more technically, it is a statement, an action, or tacit approval from the Prophet ﷺ. Tacit approval sounds like a very complicated word. You may be asking me, is that the name of some food? No, tacit approval, inshallah, I'll explain right now. A statement. Rasulullah ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. This is a statement. This is a verbal utterance. This is a hadith. Also in action. The Prophet ﷺ, he performed 2 raka'at of salah after Maghrib. A Sahabi narrates this, he is narrating an action. He's narrating an action. So this shows that this is a hadith. Another part of a hadith is tacit approval. What is tacit approval? Imagine I'm the principal of a school, and a student comes inside and he has a phone, and he's playing video games on the phone, and I don't say anything. That indirectly shows that he is allowed to use his phone, because if I'm the principal, it's my responsibility to tell him, you are not allowed to do that in the school. You have to stop playing with your phone. In a similar fashion, when the Prophet ﷺ is sitting with the Sahaba, and the Sahaba say something, do something, and he doesn't correct them or make any comment, just because he is the Prophet and he would have to correct him or her, and he doesn't do so, is evidence that that is also hadith. It is established from the Prophet ﷺ. Is that understood so far? A statement, a verbal utterance, and something which is done in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, and he doesn't disapprove of it. When we talk about a hadith, there are 2 parts to it. For instance, the brother, he said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That is only the words. But the question comes, how do I know the Prophet ﷺ said that? I can go open up Sahih al-Bukhari and I'll find that the hadith is recorded over there. So what will I do? Okay, mashallah, the Prophet ﷺ said that. But how did Imam Bukhari find out about that hadith? He heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody. So we can say a hadith has 2 parts. One is known as the sanad or isnad, and one is known as the matan, that is the text. I'll give you an example. A very beautiful hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. A very beautiful hadith that we should implement into our lives. That until I do not love for my brother what I love for myself, then my iman is not perfected. And just to digress, when we go into these technical discussions, at the same time we should not get sidetracked. We should remember the message. Look at this hadith, it's so beautiful. And we should inculcate it into our lives. That my Muslim brother, mashallah, he's walking with me. And I go into the store and we want to buy a car, both of us. And you see a brand new Toyota and there's only one left. I want it for myself, I should also want it for my brother if he wants it as well. Practical advices. Now let's look at this hadith. There's two parts to the hadith. One is the part that I highlighted in green, and one is the part that's left in white. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala in his Sahih, he says, حدثنا مسدد. That my teacher Musaddad, he narrated to me. Musaddad is the name of a particular scholar, Musaddad ibn Musarhad. He says, I heard from my teacher, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan. He said, I heard from my teacher, Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj. He says, I heard from my teacher, Qatada. He says, I heard from my teacher, Anas radiallahu anhu, who said he heard from his teacher, none other than the beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who said, none of you believes until he loves for himself, for his brother, what he loves for himself. How beautiful is that? So many people, they'll quote, for instance, the Bible, or they'll quote the Torah, but they're quoting things that they themselves aren't sure whether it reads us accurately or not. Over here, we know who narrated what. When I say Musaddad, when I say Yahya al-Qattan, when I say Shu'bah, these aren't random names. Just like I know the people sitting in front of me. If you're going to ask me who's Sheikh Taha Abdul Basir, I'll tell you this is the Sheikh, this is his biography, I know this about him. That name, Yahya al-Qattan, Shu'bah, all of these names, we know who they are and we know how reliable they are. And when we talk about the classification of hadith, when we say a hadith is da'if, a hadith is weak, what does that mean? When we say a hadith is da'if or a hadith is weak, what does that mean? That means you see this chain of transmission. Hypothetically speaking, if you say Shu'bah and it is somebody else, for example, his name is Hadeeth al-Awa, we will say that this person, he is weak, he is a liar, he does this. Because he is a liar, we know that the information that he's transmitting is unreliable. That is the beauty of Islam, that we can tell you the authenticity of what we hear from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran, mashallah, has been preserved to the letter. The hadith has also been preserved, but we're not aware of that. And that brings me to the next discussion, the preservation of hadith. You may say, you're telling me that the hadith has been preserved, but how do I not know that it's a bunch of Muslims who are just getting together and they're blowing their own trumpet? One Muslim will scratch the back of the other Muslim and say, you know, mashallah, all the ahadith are authentic. I'm going to give you two quotes from famous Orientalists. Does anybody know who an Orientalist is? Yes, an Orientalist, a mustashriq.
A person that studies Islam but they're not Muslim themselves?
Similar, quite close, European scholars who studied Islam, and definitely they had agendas behind that as well. So you'll have non-Muslim scholars in the universities who are studying about Islam. Until recently they were known as Orientalists, although that term isn't used that much anymore. So I want to quote one particular Orientalist. His name is Alois Sprenger. Alois Sprenger was a critic of Islam. He knew Arabic. He wrote on he translated a biography of the Sahaba, Al-Isaba. Yet he criticized Islam. But one observation that he made, what did he say? There is no nation, nor has there been any which, like the Muslims, during 12 centuries recorded the life of every man of letters. What does this mean? That when in the previous sanad I showed you Musaddad, I showed you Shu'bah, I showed you Yahya ibn al-Qattan, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, we know who these people are. Unfortunately, other faiths, other communities, they don't know who these people are. You know, they say that they know that I'm quoting so-and-so, but in reality they don't know. They say we love so-and-so, but they don't actually know. You know, that reminded me of a joke. I promise you guys I'll tell you a joke, so I'll tell you a quick joke inshallah. So, there was a couple, they walked into Walmart. Elderly couple, and as they're walking, they're buying, you know, mashallah, their goods for themselves. So the grandmother tells, the elderly woman tells the husband, honey, you know what, I want to buy something, what do you think? She says, you know, sweetheart, buy whatever you want. They carry on, a few minutes later, the elderly woman says, my beloved, I want to buy something, what do you think? The guy says, whatever you want. A while later, the elderly lady says, you know, beautiful man, you know, what do you want? And he's constantly using these beloved phrases. So there's a youngster in the back, and he's hearing this conversation, so he thinks to himself, wow, this couple, they love themselves so much, each other so much, that they don't call each other by their names. They call each other by sweetheart, beloved, beautiful man, all of these beautiful phrases, but they don't call them by their names. I need to know the secret behind their love. So the little child, he goes to this grandma, and he says, Grandma, I see that you love Grandpa so much, can you tell me your secret? She says, yeah, come closer, I'll tell you the secret. She's like, I've been married to this man for 50 years. I've been married to this man for 50 years. 10 years ago, I forgot his name. And I don't know what to call him. So I'll tell him sweetheart, beloved, I'll call him all these things. He will never know. MashaAllah, he'll live on and he'll be happy. That's good enough. That's what you call knowing somebody, beloved, everything, but in reality, you don't know who that person is. When I tell you a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. Not by me as a Muslim, but by a non-Muslim Orientalist. He even confesses that we can tell you who these people are and how reliable they are, because of which we can say with confidence that the Prophet ﷺ said this. Another example is Asad Rustum. Asad Rustum was a Lebanese Christian historian who studied in the West, and he came back and he made a very phenomenal statement. He wrote many books. He wrote the book Mustalah al-Tariq for anybody interested. He said the methodology, and I quote, obviously paraphrasing, the methodology of the Hadith scholars surpasses Western historical methods. Meaning the Western scholars, they've developed a set of critical tools to study history. After he studied that, he went back and he studied the Mustalah al-Hadith. When we say Hadith is Sahih, Hadith is Hasan, Hadith is Da'if. And he himself said that I can tell you that the Muhaddithun 1,000 years ago have developed tools by which they've surpassed historical methods provided by Western scholars of today. That is fascinating. That is just a very brief outline of how the ahadith have reached us so perfectly, and we can say with confidence that the Prophet ﷺ actually said it. Now before I go to the next two slides, I do want to mention, number one, it may be contentious for some. Number two, it is something I want people to listen with an open mind, inshallah. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them afterwards, inshallah. I'm going to talk about two different sets of hadith. And each set of hadith affect a different age group in our community. The first group of hadith I'm going to talk about may affect the more young among us. People who are going to high school, people who are going to college. You'll generally get questions by Islamophobes, by critics who will criticize Islam. Just this morning, I was reading a particular Christian apologist. He's also a critic of Islam. His name is David Wood. You know, he was criticizing a particular practice of the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith. Now when people read these hadith, mashallah, they're all beautiful hadith. But sometimes it can become difficult for us to understand, you know what, how could the Prophet ﷺ do that? Is it true that this is mentioned in the hadith? People who go to college, how many of us over here go to college? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. MashaAllah. Okay, not that many. How many go to high school? Alright, okay, that's still good. How many of us went to college at least? Or high school? Okay, that's a bit larger group, MashaAllah. So anybody who went to college, you know that if you had an Islamic studies professor or you had somebody who was not so favorable towards Islam, he would criticize certain aspects, and you see majority of these are directed more to the hadith. So in the next slide, I want to talk about certain guidelines that we can use when reading the hadith so as not to fall into the trap of Islamophobes or critics towards Islam. I'll call these descriptive hadith. Hadith which talk about the Prophet ﷺ, for instance, he did something, and somebody tells you, how could your Prophet do this? And you feel very hurt. But if you keep these guidelines in mind, then it will be easier to understand. Number one, the limits of human reason. A few years ago, there was a woman on YouTube and she was criticizing Islam. She was saying, look at your religion, look at your hadith. It says that when a person is sleeping and he doesn't wake up for Fajr, then shaitan comes and urinates in his ear. Shaitan comes and urinates in his ear. We all know this hadith, right? That shaitan comes and urinates in his ear. So she's saying, look at this absurd hadith. How can shaitan come and urinate in a person's ear? I don't see anything. Now if a person comes to you with this hadith, how would you respond? Yes?
I would say that the urine is an example of something that Satan creates for himself and puts into.
That's a possible explanation. Figurative reading, we're actually going to get to that. I would primarily answer that by saying, when we learn something or know something, there are three ways we come to know something. You call this epistemology, the field of knowledge. Number one is our senses. For instance, I have this bottle over here. If I want to know what this bottle is, I can feel it, I can taste it, the water inside, I can smell it if it gives off a scent. That way I can come to learn something. But for instance, I want to know where this bottle was made. Can I use my five senses to find that out? You can't. You need to use your reasoning. You use your mind that this was built in a factory. So something which is better than your five senses is the human reason. The human reason goes beyond that. But beyond human reason, you have revelation. That the mind is limited, but beyond that you have revelation. I'll give you an example. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that during Isra, during the Laylatul Mi'raj, he went to the heavens. Can I perceive this with my intellect? How can he go all the way to the heavens? But we have revelation that comes and tells us this. So when the hadith is saying that the shaitan urinates in your ears, you're using your intellect regarding something which is beyond the scope of your intellect. You call this supra-rational, beyond the scope of your intellect. So that is one thing. When the ahadith talk about certain things that is beyond our human reason, it's not contrary, it's just beyond. We shouldn't just dismiss the hadith. Number two, context matters. It's very important to contextualize hadith. We know that the Prophet ﷺ got married to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha when she was young. Or the Prophet ﷺ had a number of wives. Now, somebody can look into the hadith and say, this is so problematic. Why is it that the Prophet ﷺ did this? Well, it's very important to contextualize. Why? Because what happened 1400 years ago, the context, the atmosphere doesn't necessarily apply to me today. It's not necessary that something which was valid that time necessarily is valid right now. So if the Prophet ﷺ got married when Aisha was young, that does not mean that it's now considered wrong, that I can go back in time and say it's wrong now, so it definitely has to be wrong 1400 years ago as well. So we cannot be anachronistic. We have to contextualize whatever we read. And this is not to be morally relativist, moral relativism, where we say that anything goes anytime. No, the Prophet ﷺ sunnah is valid every time, every place. But at the same time, you have to contextualize to better understand. Number two. Number three, when we read hadith, we have to give a figurative reading of hadith. Anybody heard the famous hadith that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is sitting with Abu Dhar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he says, "Oh Abu Dhar, do you know where the shams, the sun is going during sunset?" He says, "No, I don't know." He says that it's going beneath the arsh of Allah and is prostrating. Now you're going to ask a scientist, does the sun actually go beneath the arsh? It doesn't make sense. I thought that the earth rotates around the sun. It's not the other way around. The sun doesn't go anywhere. So this hadith doesn't make sense. You have to understand, we can't take everything literally. When the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the sun is making sajda, it's prostrating, Allah mentioned in the Quran that everything has a tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This water bottle is doing tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The carpet is doing tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's something that we do not understand. So when the Prophet ﷺ is saying that during sunset, the sun is doing prostration, he is not saying that it's physically doing a prostration. He is saying that the sun, in its own manner, in its own fashion, it is prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by following the command. It is a figurative reading, we shouldn't take it literally. And last, we should make a distinction between what is impossible and what is unlikely. Recently, a lot of people started criticizing that the moon was split. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, during his time, the moon was split. Now people are criticizing, how is that possible? How could the moon be split during the time of the Prophet ﷺ? I don't believe this. You have to make a distinction between impossible and unlikely. 300 years ago, you tell a person that I can get to another country in a matter of hours. He will tell you that makes no sense. Are you out of your mind? How can you travel so far? You tell him that today, he'll say, wow, you know, it actually makes sense. You can travel so quickly. So it was never impossible. What is impossible? For instance, I have a square and I say I'll make it into a circle, something which is inherent in and of itself. So I know these are some complex, complicated guidelines, but these are meant for us who are going to college, high school, or we, come across people who criticize hadith. It's very beneficial to keep this in mind. Now that has to do with one particular demographic, one particular age group. I want to talk about another set of hadith. These are known as legalistic hadith. Legalistic hadith. What do I mean by this? It's so common for a person who doesn't know Arabic, who doesn't know hardly anything about Islam, and he'll come and argue with you. And he will say, brother, why are you going against the hadith? You are praying salah in a particular way, but the hadith says it's a completely different way. Now that's an objection people raise, and it is a legitimate objection to an extent. The person may have justifiable reason to believe that you are practicing in one way, but the hadith is saying something else. So when we talk about the dynamics of hadith, it's very important to know how we approach hadith of a legal nature. What do I mean by legal nature? Hadith regarding salah, regarding zakah, ibadat, etc., etc. I want to mention one quote by Sufyan ibn Uyayna, a very famous scholar. He's the Ustad of Al-Humaydi and a number of others, very big scholar. He says that hadith can potentially be a source of confusion except for the scholars. What does he mean by this? That read the hadith, if it's hadith of virtues, that the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever stays after Fajr and he performs Ishraq, he'll get the reward of Hajj and Umrah. Read those hadith, those are fine. But when you start reading hadith and you don't have any qualification or experience, and you begin to deduce without any Arabic, what's going to happen? You can get confused. So number one, when we talk about the four imams or the four scholars, remember there was not only four, there was hundreds before. But they also had the love for hadith. I gave the example like the Ark of Nuh. Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala is reported to have said, Ibn Abdul Barr mentioned this in his book on Fadail al-Ilm, Jami'u Bayan al-Ilmi wa Fadli. He says that Imam Malik said, I believe the hadith and the sunnah to be like the Ark of Nuh, Safina to Nuh. Whoever boards the Nuh alayhi salam's Safina, his ark, he's going to be saved. And if he doesn't, he's going to be destroyed. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, if people study hadith, then the community will be stable. If people do not study hadith, the community will no longer be stable. So this shows that these scholars, they knew hadith and they loved hadith. So when somebody is praying salah, just one second, I'll get back to you inshallah. When somebody's praying salah, and he's praying in a particularly different way, and he's following a scholar, we shouldn't be so quick to just say that this person, he doesn't like hadith. Who is Imam Abu Hanifa? He doesn't know hadith. No, we have to take a step back and understand that this person is a great scholar. He's Imam Abu Hanifa, he knows what hadith is. Yes, brother?
Why are we putting such emphasis on the hadith? I understand it gives us technicalities.
Sure.
But like,
why is there so much emphasis on hadith? Because the title of tonight's lecture was A Night of Hadeeth. I don't know if you read that, maybe that's why.
no, I mean,
I'm joking.
Muslims. Like I was with my Saudi friends and
Okay,
they
sure.
were talking about the Bukhari
Sure.
and how they emphasize it.
Sure. Why do they emphasize it? I mean, that was mentioned in the beginning, right? We have four sources of law. You have Quran, you have hadith, analogy, and ijma', consensus. So if hadith, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, is a commentary on the Quran, then what better place to go than the Prophet himself to understand the Quran? And his words and deeds are embodied in the hadith. So when the Quran mentions something, if I want to understand it, where else do I go? First the Prophet ﷺ. Does that answer your question? Alright, Jazakallah. Alright, so I think my time is running short, so I'm going to go quickly. A difference in authentication. Has anybody heard the term Sahih? Hadith is Sahih. What does that mean? Authentic, right? A very simple term, authentic. But what does it mean for a hadith to be authentic? Generally, scholars of hadith mention 5 conditions. That the person, the narrator, he has to be adl, he should be dabit, that he's upright, he has good memory, the chain of transmitters are continuous, there's no shudud or illah. So there's conditions that they made. But remember, it's not necessary that everybody follows the same conditions. They can have a difference. So I'll give you an example. We heard the famous statement, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي. When a hadith is sahih, it is my madhab. So when I see a hadith in Bukhari, does that mean I can go to a person and say, look, this hadith is sahih, so you have to follow it right now? That's not necessarily the case. Why? Because the rules of authentication are different. What one scholar deems authentic can be slightly different than what another scholar deems authentic. That is just a very brief explanation of a much larger subject. That authentication is different. And this is a sign of the beauty and the complexity of Islam. That we have an ummah that used its brilliance to preserve the life of the Prophet ﷺ in different channels and different avenues. Difference in understanding. It's one hadith, but people can understand it differently. I'll give you a case study. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Al-bayyi'an bil-khiyar ma lam yatafarraqa." That, for instance, Brother Imran over here, I want to go to him and I want to buy something. I want to buy that from him. Now, if I want to buy it from him, I give him the money and I take the book, for instance. What if I want a refund? The Prophet ﷺ says that as long as they do not separate from each other, they have the right to get the refund. So I bought the book from him, I'm sitting over here, I say, you know what brother, I don't like the book, I want the money back. So I can get the money back. But the word used in the hadith is مَا لَمْ يَتَفَرَّقَا, as long as they do not separate. Some scholars understand separating meaning physically, that I'm sitting with Brother Imran and I say that, you know what, I'll see you later, and I walk away. Now I have physically separated, so I cannot get a refund. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is not physical separation, but verbal separation. That I'm talking about buying this book. Once our discussion comes to an end, it is as though verbally we have separated and the discussion comes to an end. So look, you have one hadith, but you have a difference of understanding. Last one, difference in scope of knowledge. It's very common that one scholar will have understanding of a hadith, but another scholar does not know about that. It's very common that I know this hadith, but you don't know. That's why we go to people and you say, brother, look at this hadith, you're not practicing upon it. So I just want to mention a quick question that we may have, that the scholars of the past, they knew hadith. But today, we have so much access to hadith. We have internet databases, we have programs like Shamila, we have hundreds of hadith books. So why is it that I should be equally qualified to go into the hadith and make up my own fiqh, so to say? But there's a difference. Can anybody tell me how many hadith Imam Ahmad used for his musnad? Anybody heard of Musnad Ahmad? How many? 10,000 is a good estimate, but it was much more than that. How much? 40,000 is a good estimate, but it's actually more than that. MashaAllah, Sheikh Basir is the expert in Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Anybody else? 100,000? It's more than that. They say from 700,000 hadith, Imam Ahmad, he collected his Musnad. And obviously you have different transmissions, you have various routes, etc. But if he had so many hadith, we shouldn't think that now we have more access to it. Again, I was just digressing, talking about legalistic hadith, just certain guidelines on how we should approach hadith. I really apologize if it got very technical, but the benefit of this is so we can understand. I just want to wrap up the discussion, inshallah, for my part. A few points that we can take away from tonight's discussion. Number one, the science of hadith is one of the greatest accomplishments of the Muslim civilization. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we think of algebra, we think about flight, we think about coffee, we think about a number of things. But mashallah, with the first try, he said it right away. We should also think about the development and the preservation of hadith, what a scientific method they have developed to preserve when we say the Prophet ﷺ said something. Once Salman al-Farsi, we heard of Salman al-Farsi, right? We know Salman al-Farsi? Yes. Salman al-Farsi radiallahu ta'ala an, he was walking. And a person, he was mocking and saying, oh, so your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught you everything? Did he even teach you how to use the bathroom? Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu, he said, yes, he even taught me how to use the bathroom. He said, when you go to the bathroom, do not face the qibla, do not let your back face the qibla. What does this show? That our deen, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Islam is perfect. Everything about Islam is perfect, and it would teach you everything you need to know. From complex issues such as politics, but mundane issues as going to the bathroom as well. And that is something we should bring joy and pride in our hearts. So the science of hadith is one method through which we know what the Prophet ﷺ did to preserve the hadith. Number two, hadith is one of four sources of law. Like the brother said, why do we put so much emphasis on hadith? The reason we put so much emphasis is it is one of four sources of law. We shouldn't just say we don't need hadith, we only want the Quran. You know, it's funny, a person, this is mentioned in Al-Jami' li-Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami Kifaya and a number of other books of Khatib al-Baghdadi. A scholar a Sahabi by the name Imran ibn Hussein. Have you heard of that Sahabi? Imran ibn Hussein. He was sitting and a person said that tell me something, but I don't want to hear the hadith. What did he say? Tell me something, but I want to hear a hadith. Tell me straight from the Quran. Imran ibn Hussein, he got angry. He says, did you pray Salatul Dhuhr? He says, yes. How many rakats did you pray? He says, 4. He says, go in the Quran and show me that 4 rakats that you have to pray in the Quran. He's like, oh, you're right, I don't find it in the Quran. He says, you have to go to the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah told us to go into the life of the Prophet ﷺ. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. That if you love Allah, then you have to love the Prophet ﷺ. And how do we find the life of the Prophet ﷺ? It is recorded in the beautiful hadith, and it is one of the source of law. We spoke about general guidelines of reading hadith, that if a person comes and he criticizes hadith, what are general guidelines we have to bear in mind? Then we talk about the dynamics of employing legalistic hadith. That what do we do when we get into a hadith and I just want to practice upon it? We shouldn't be so hasty, we should go to a scholar and understand. Before I conclude, I just want to mention the same hadith I mentioned in the beginning. نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَوَعَاهَا فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ فَرُبَّ مُبَلَّغٍ أَوْعَى مِنْ سَامِعٍ. Alhamdulillah, we attend so many different lectures. But we should also try to read the hadith. We should be in the lectures of hadith, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said that may Allah brighten the face of those people who hear my hadith. After they hear my hadith, they practice upon it. The people in the past, they tried their best to follow the Prophet ﷺ to the minutest detail. I'll mention one story. His name is Abu Ali al-Lamishi. He was a 6th century Usuli scholar. One day he stayed in his house and a guest was there. His name was Ibn Sam'ani, the author of Qawati al-Adillah. He was at his house, and at night time, this scholar, Al-Lamishi, he went missing. So Sam'ani, he wakes up, he's like, where's my teacher? I can't find him. So he walks out, it's the middle of the night, and he looks from the window and he sees his teacher is going into the forest. So he starts following his teacher into the forest. He's spying from a distance, but he doesn't let him know of his whereabouts. He's following him, and then he sees that his teacher takes off his clothes, and there was a small stream over there, and he jumps into the stream, and he doesn't come out. So the student, he's counting the seconds. It's been 30 seconds, 45 seconds. Now he's getting scared. Did my teacher die? Did he drown? What happened? So he starts screaming, the teacher is drowning, the teacher is drowning. So the teacher, he gets up, he comes to the surface, he's like, what are you making noise for? And first of all, what are you doing over here? You're supposed to be sleeping in the house? He says, oh Sheikh, I'm so sorry. I saw that you went in the water, and I thought that perhaps you drowned. He says, you know what? You ruined my day. He says, what? I didn't ruin your day. I thought you were going to drown. I came here to save you. He says, when I went into the stream, you know what I did? I went and I did sajda by the rocks over there, because I know no human being in the history of mankind put his forehead beneath the water on the rocks making sajda to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, I'm going to go to Allah and I'm going to say that, oh Allah, I did something which nobody was able to do. And accept this and bring me into Jannah. That is what you talk about emulation. Try your best to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the opportunity to understand the hadith, to follow the hadith, and enjoy the companionship of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You may say how he passed away. They say Ashabul Hadith humu Ashabul Nabi wa in lam yashabu nafsahu anfasahu sahibu. That you want to be in the company of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you want to be in the company of the Prophet ﷺ? Who here wants to be in the company of the Prophet ﷺ? All of us, right? You want to be, the poet, he says, that if you read the words of the Prophet ﷺ, it is as though he is in your company. Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he mentions, as mentioned in Siyar wa A'lam al-Nubala of Dhahabi, he says that Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he stays by himself. And somebody says, don't you ever feel scared? You're in the room by yourself. He says, how can I feel scared? I read the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet is right next to me, and the Sahaba are right next to me. We ask Allah to get that ability, to get that tawfiq to reach their levels, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.